before the world knew him as the easygoing Chester Good with a famous limp. Dennis Weaver was just another struggling actor trying to make it in Hollywood. When Gunsmoke launched in 1955, it was already on radio, but the television version needed new faces. Weaver was cast as Marshall Dillon's loyal sidekick, meek, dependable, and always hobbling along. But behind that quirky gait was an actor far more ambitious than his character ever let on. Chester became a household name, and Weaver's chemistry with James Arness helped cement Gunsmoke as a cultural phenomenon. The show topped ratings, and Weaver received an Emmy in 1959. But as the years dragged on, something began to change. While fans saw Chester as lovable and irreplaceable, Dennis felt trapped. Playing the same character year after year, especially one designed to be the comic relief, began to wear on him. Behind the scenes, he was growing frustrated with the monotony. He often described the role as limiting, physically and creatively. One of his biggest regrets was the limp he gave Chester, originally meant as a way to stand out. But after nearly a decade of playing hobbled, it took actual physical therapy and yoga for him to walk normally again. Weaver also felt financially undervalued. Despite Gunsmoke's massive success, paid parody and profit sharing weren't what they are today. He reportedly believed that sticking around would mean stalling his growth, not just artistically, but economically too. In 1964, he made the bold decision to leave. It shocked fans and disappointed producers, but Weaver saw it as a necessary leap. He exited after 9 seasons, still at the top of his game, and hoped to find new challenges beyond the dusty streets of Dodge. But leaving a hit show like Gunsmoke wasn't without its risks. Many in the industry whispered that was a bad move, one he might regret. Others admired the guts it took to walk away from a sure thing. At the time, no one knew how Amanda Blake, Miss Kitty herself, really felt about his decision. Publicly, she said all the right things. Privately, though, the seeds of resentment were already growing. She believed the show was finally starting to mature, evolving past its earlier stage. Chester's character, though iconic, represented an earlier, more basic version of Gunsmoke. And as far as Amanda was concerned, going backward was the last thing they needed. But that was only the beginning. Because when rumors surfaced years later that Weaver might return, even briefly, Amanda didn't just shrug it off. She openly called it a mistake. Not many actors go on record disapproving of a colleague's return. But Amanda Blake wasn't like most actors. And her feelings toward Dennis Weaver? Let's just say, things ran deeper than fans ever imagined. And what happened next would shake even the most loyal Gunsmoke followers. It started as a simple acting choice. During his audition for Gunsmoke, Dennis Weaver made a split-second decision that would shape his career and his body for years to come. To help Chester Good stand out from other TV sidekicks, he added a limp. Just like that, the character took on a unique physical identity. It was subtle at first, just a slight hobble, but it added vulnerability and made Chester instantly memorable. That limp became iconic. Viewers loved Chester's awkward but endearing walk. It gave him an everyman charm that balanced the ruggedness of Marshall Dillon. But what fans didn't realize was that Weaver paid a hidden price for that little detail. Playing someone with a consistent limp for nearly a decade took a serious physical toll. Day in and day out, he had to contort his body, favoring one side and shifting his weight unnaturally in nearly every scene. By the time Weaver left Gunsmoke, walking normally didn't come naturally anymore. He developed muscle memory that made his gait feel permanently altered. Off-screen, he turned to yoga and stretching techniques to retrain his body, attempting to undo the very thing that had made him famous. It wasn't just discomfort, it was identity. For nearly 10 years, he was Chester, and stepping out of that skin proved harder than he'd ever imagined. It wasn't just physical. The limp symbolized everything Dennis was trying to move on from. Chester was sweet, loyal, and lovable, but he wasn't dynamic. He didn't evolve. As the seasons rolled on, the writers didn't expand his arc. There were no big plot twists for Chester, no personal revelations, no deep backstory. And for an actor hungry for challenge, that was soul-crushing. In interviews after his departure, Weaver never directly blamed anyone, but the undertone was clear. He'd outgrown the role. The limp, the predictability, the lack of depth, it all felt like artistic claustrophobia. He didn't want to be remembered as the guy who hobbled behind James Arness. He wanted to prove he could be more. And yet, the world didn't let go of Chester Good easily. Even years after leaving the show, fans would call out to him in public using the character's name. They'd mimic the limp, ask him to do the voice, and act like no time had passed. For Weaver, it was both flattering and frustrating. No matter what new roles he took on, Chester was always there, shadowing him like an old injury. So when talk began of Dennis Weaver making a return appearance on Gunsmoke, even briefly, it wasn't just the fans who had strong feelings. Amanda Blake wasn't thrilled. In fact, she thought it was a step backward, not just for Dennis, but for the show as a whole. Because for Amanda, Gunsmoke had changed since Chester left. It had matured, toughened, and grown out its early, more innocent form. Bringing Chester back? That was a relic of the past. And Amanda wasn't about to let that happen without speaking her mind. But her reaction wasn't just about the show. It was personal and far more pointed than anyone expected. On screen, Miss Kitty and Chester Good were like family. Their chemistry was effortless, their banter lighthearted, and their loyalty to Marshall Dillon and each other felt genuine. But behind the scenes, Amanda Blake's feelings toward Dennis Weaver were more complicated than anyone realized. When Dennis left Gunsmoke in 1964, Amanda didn't publicly criticize him. If anything, she played the professional. In interviews, she described his exit as understandable, even respectable. She said he made the right decision for himself and his career. But years later, when whispers began that Weaver might return, if only for a cameo, Amanda dropped the polite facade. She didn't mince words. In a striking interview that resurfaced years after it aired, Amanda was quoted saying she thought it was a mistake to bring Dennis back to the show. Not just unnecessary, but actively regressive. And the way she framed it said more than the words themselves. She explained that Gunsmoke had evolved without Chester. The show, in her words, had progressed since Weaver left. That one word, progress, carried weight. It wasn't just about character development. It wasn't just about screen time. Amanda was making a statement. Chester represented an old version of Gunsmoke, softer, simpler, and in her mind, less mature. And by bringing him back, even briefly, the show will be taking a step backward. It wasn't nostalgia. It was disruption. To understand Amanda's stance, you have to see how fiercely she protected Gunsmoke. Unlike many actors who treat a long-running role as just another gig, Amanda poured herself into Miss Kitty. She didn't just act the part, she lived it. And in the later seasons, Kitty had evolved just as the show had. She was no longer just a saloon owner with a heart of gold. She was strong, complex, and central to the show's deeper themes. Bringing back Chester, even for a single episode, risked unearthing a version of Gunsmoke that Amanda had worked hard to move past. And that's where her words took on a personal tone. Because while she credited Dennis for leaving when the time was right, she also called his reasons monotonous. That word choice wasn't accidental. It subtly undermined his complaints about creative boredom and typecasting. To Amanda, it sounded like he got bored, gave up, and moved on, while the rest of them stayed, committed to project's long-term growth. And now, years later, when the show had finally found a new rhythm and a sharper tone, here he was, considering a return? That didn't sit well with her. It wasn't just about preserving the show's evolution. It was also about respect for the hard work the cast had put in since his departure, for the new characters who had filled the void, and for the creative direction the show had embraced. Amanda Blake wasn't afraid to ruffle feathers. She wasn't playing politics. She was saying what many cast members might have only whispered. To her, bringing Chester back was like reopening an old wound, one the show had already healed from. And while she kept it professional in public, those close to the set knew Her words weren't just about Gunsmoke, they were about Dennis. And the tension between them, it had never really gone away. When Dennis Weaver walked away from Gunsmoke in 1964, it was a bold move, maybe even reckless, depending on who you asked. He had been a staple of one of television's most successful shows, with millions of loyal fans who knew him only as Chester Good. Leaving that kind of stability behind in pursuit of something new was a gamble. And for a while, it looked like it might not pay off. Weaver didn't waste time jumping into new projects. His first venture post-Gunsmoke was Kentucky Jones, a family drama where he played a widowed veterinarian raising an adopted Chinese boy. The show premiered with moderate buzz, riding off Weaver's popularity. But the magic wasn't there. Audiences didn't connect with it, and it was canceled after just one season. The critics were polite, but the subtext was clear. Chester's shoes were big ones to fill, and Dennis hadn't yet proven he could walk without the limp, figuratively or literally. But Weaver wasn't the kind of actor who folded easily. In the late 1960s, he landed another role, this time in Gentle Ben, a family adventure series about a Florida game warden and a bear. Once again, the premise was warm, but not exactly groundbreaking. Dennis took a supporting role, but it was clear he was still finding his footing. And through it all, Gunsmoke continued to thrive without him. This was where Amanda Blake's viewpoint began to feel validated. While she had publicly supported his initial departure, her later remarks about Weaver's return being a mistake carried an unspoken implication. He had his chance, and he blew it. Gunsmoke had survived without Chester. In fact, it had gotten stronger. The chemistry between the remaining cast, especially with Ken Curtis stepping in as Festus, took the show in a new direction, grittier, more mature, less comedic. And Amanda had grown into a deeper, more commanding presence as Miss Kitty. But Dennis Weaver wasn't done yet. In 1970, he made a career-defining comeback, this time as Deputy Marshal Sam McCloud in the series McCloud. The role was a dramatic shift from Chester. McCloud was charming, sharp, and slick, a New Mexico lawman navigating the rough streets of New York. The show became a hit, part of NBC's mystery movie rotation, and ran for 7 successful seasons. Finally, Dennis had shed the shadow of Chester Good. He earned multiple Emmy nominations and found a new generation of fans. The limp was gone. The cowboy hat was still there, but this time, it came with swagger instead of subservience. McCloud proved that Dennis wasn't just a one-note character actor. He had range. He had staying power. But even as the star rose again, the ghost of Gunsmoke never fully disappeared. Anytime a reunion was discussed, Dennis's name came up, and so did Amanda Blake's comments. Some saw her as territorial. Others saw her as brutally honest. Either way, their Cold War simmered, never erupting publicly, but always there beneath the surface. In the end, Dennis Weaver did find success, but came only after years of uncertainty and trial. And whether Amanda ever truly respected his reinvention remains unclear. But one thing was certain, neither of them forgot what came before. And for Amanda, the next chapter in Gunsmoke didn't have space for old ghosts, no matter how popular they once were. To millions of loyal Gunsmoke fans, Chester and Miss Kitty felt like family. Their interactions were sweet, playful, and easygoing, exactly what audiences loved during the golden era of television. But what many didn't realize was that once the cameras stopped rolling, Amanda Blake and Dennis Weaver didn't share that same warmth. In fact, it turns out their friendship might have been purely for the screen. While neither actor ever came out swinging in public interviews, those close to the set noticed something different. There was no real camaraderie between Amanda and Dennis during downtime. No inside jokes. No lingering post-scene laughs. According to multiple crew members and extras, Amanda was fiercely professional. Respectful, yes, but guarded. And Dennis? He often kept to himself, especially in later seasons, when he began expressing quiet frustration with the limitations of his role. The tension wasn't dramatic, no shouting matches or big blow-ups, but it was undeniable. As one insider put it, You could feel the cold air whenever the two were near each other off camera. Amanda was loyal to the show and protective of its direction. She didn't have patience for distractions or egos. And Dennis, for all his talent, was clearly getting restless. Their priorities were no longer aligned. He was looking beyond Gunsmoke. She was all in, but it wasn't just professional divergence. There were subtle personality clashes. Amanda was known to speak her mind. She was assertive, especially when it came to how the show portrayed its female characters. She had fought hard to give Miss Kitty depth and independence beyond being a saloon owner or love interest. Meanwhile, Dennis, who had crafted Chester as a comic relief sidekick, wasn't always enthusiastic about the show's growing seriousness in tone. One story that often circulates among longtime TV historians involves a specific table read late in Dennis's Gunsmoke tenure. Amanda reportedly raised concerns about Chester interrupting a critical scene with forced humor. She thought the moment needed gravity, not gags. Dennis didn't push back, but his reaction was clipped, cold, even. After that, they rarely spoke outside of filming, unless absolutely necessary. When Dennis left the show, Amanda didn't object publicly, but she also didn't fight to keep him. In fact, some say she welcomed the change. Ken Curtis, who replaced Chester with his character Festus, had a different energy. His interactions with Amanda felt more dynamic, less constrained by comic relief tropes. The creative shift worked. Gunsmoke leaned harder into drama, and Amanda's role expanded significantly. She finally got the screen time and complexity she'd been craving. Years later, when reunion rumors began swirling and Dennis Weaver's possible return was floated, Amanda's sharp response, calling it a mistake, carried the weight of years of unresolved tension. It wasn't just about the show's direction. It wasn't even about Dennis's limp or acting choices. It was personal. Amanda had built something lasting on Gunsmoke after he left, and the idea of him re-entering the picture, whether for nostalgia or ratings, felt like disrespect to everything the cast had accomplished in his absence. But just when things seemed settled, one final twist brought the old drama right back into the spotlight. And this time, it was impossible to ignore. Years after Gunsmoke wrapped up its legendary run, whispers began swirling of a reunion. Fans had never truly let go of the dusty streets of Dodge City or the unforgettable cast that brought it to life. And with the rise of made-for-TV reunion movies in the 80s, CBS saw an opportunity. Bring back the original stars, let nostalgia do the rest, and give audiences one last ride. At first, the idea seemed simple. James Arness was on board. Amanda Blake, too. But when Dennis Weaver's name entered the conversation, the atmosphere shifted. According to insiders close to the project, Amanda's reaction was immediate and fierce. She didn't just disagree with the idea of Dennis returning, she outright opposed it. Behind closed doors, Amanda allegedly told producers that bringing Dennis back would be a betrayal of what the show had become. Her reasoning was part artistic, part personal. She believed Chester Good had no place in the more serious, evolved world Gunsmoke had grown into. But more than that, Amanda viewed Dennis's potential return as opportunistic. Where was he when the show needed him? She reportedly asked during one tense production call. This was Amanda Blake unfiltered. Decades of professionalism and restraint finally gave way to raw honesty. She had stayed with the show through thick and thin. She had watched it survive cast shakeups, budget cuts, and network threats. She had earned her seat at the table, and she wasn't about to let it be reshuffled for old time's sake. Dennis, for his part, never publicly responded to Amanda's opposition, but sources close to him said he was taken aback. He hadn't expected a warm welcome, but he certainly hadn't expected such vocal pushback. The idea of him returning, even in a small role or cameo, was quickly shelved. Whether it was due to Amanda's influence or broader creative decisions, it didn't matter. The result was the same. Chester Good would not be coming back. The reunion films went on without him. Amanda reprised her role as Miss Kitty in Return to Dodge in 1987, and though the chemistry with James Arness was still strong, There was something undeniably missing, at least for longtime fans who had hoped for a full circle moment. But for Amanda, it was exactly what it needed to be. No regressions, no ghosts from the past. In a later interview, one of her final before passing, Amanda was asked whether she had any regrets about how Gunsmoke ended. She paused for a moment, then said, "We did the best we could. Some of us stayed, some of us left, and some of us were better off staying gone." That line hit harder than most fans expected. It was graceful, but the message was clear. Her feelings about Dennis Weaver hadn't changed. She never named him directly, but she didn't need to. Amanda Blake had spoken her truth, not out of bitterness, but out of loyalty to a show she had helped shape. And if that meant shutting the door on a former co-star, then so be it. The story of Amanda Blake and Dennis Weaver isn't just about a personal falling out. It's a window into the complicated world of television stardom, where success, identity, and creative control can clash in ways fans rarely see. Their feud, whether spoken or unspoken, tells us as much about Hollywood's demands as it does about two actors trying to carve their own paths. Amanda Blake wasn't just defending her character or the show. She was protecting a vision of Gunsmoke that had evolved beyond its original roots. For her, the show was more than a job. It was a living, breathing world that demanded respect. When Dennis left, she stayed. When he wanted to return, she pushed back. It was about loyalty, not just to the role, but to the entire creative journey. Dennis Weaver's story is the flip side. He took a risk, leaving a hit series to explore other roles and prove his range. That gamble took years to pay off. His career had highs and lows, but ultimately, he reinvented himself. Still, the shadow of Chester Good lingered, and so did the tension with Amanda. What this all really boils down to is change, and how difficult it can be. Both actors wanted to grow, but their paths diverged. Amanda embraced the show's evolution, while Dennis sought new horizons. When those paths crossed again, the friction was inevitable. In the end, their story reminds us that behind every iconic character and beloved show, there are real people with complex feelings and ambitions. The polished surface of TV history often hides the messy, human stories beneath. For viewers, it's a reminder: nostalgia is powerful, but progress is necessary. And sometimes, moving forward means leaving old ghosts behind, even if they were once beloved friends. As Gunsmoke fades into television legend, the tension between Amanda Blake and Dennis Weaver remains a compelling chapter, one that adds depth and intrigue to a story millions thought they knew. So next time you watch an episode, remember, every character has a backstory, not just on screen, but off. And sometimes, those off-screen stories are the most fascinating of all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories like this.